In the endless stretch of the South Australian outback, where silence feels heavier than sound, a 4-year-old boy named Gus Lamont vanished into nothing. No footprints, no clues, not even a whisper of where he went. Search teams combed every inch of red earth. Helicopters circled for days. Drones scanned the horizon. But the outback gave nothing back. And as the hours turned into days, and days into disbelief, a haunting question began to echo across Australia. How does a child disappear in broad daylight, with trained searchers just meters away, and no one sees a thing? Before we dive deeper, take a moment to do one small thing that helps keep stories like Gus's alive. Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe. Because the more people who hear these stories, the fewer families are left to suffer in silence. And as you watch, drop a comment, tell me your thoughts, and where in the world you're watching from. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there knows something. Welcome back to Shadow Detective, where we dig deep into real crimes, real disappearances, and the questions that never seem to fade. Here, we don't sensationalize tragedy. We uncover truth. We break down what's known, what's been ignored, and what the public deserves to understand. Because behind every headline, every police statement, and every official explanation, there's always a human story, one that's often far more complex than it appears. Today, we're looking at one of the most haunting mysteries Australia has faced in recent years: the disappearance of 4-year-old Gus Lamont, a case that should have ended with answers, but instead left behind only silence, speculation, and heartbreak. To understand the magnitude of what happened, you first have to picture where it all began. Wooltana Station, a remote, sprawling cattle property in the South Australian outback. A place so vast and isolated that neighbors can be hours apart. Out here, the land is both breathtaking and brutal. Red dust, jagged hills, and silence that stretches farther than the horizon itself. It was in this unforgiving landscape that little Gus Lamont, just 4 years old, was last seen. A bright, curious boy, full of energy, the kind that can't sit still for long. Family described him as playful, adventurous, and deeply loved. On the day he went missing, it was supposed to be just another ordinary day. Gus was reportedly spending time with family on the property, a place they knew well. It wasn't unusual for children to explore under careful eyes. This was life in the outback, where kids grow up with dirt on their boots and the wild as their playground. But sometime that afternoon, something changed, at some point, and no one can say exactly when. Gus was simply gone. No screams, no signs of distress, just a sudden absence that made no sense. When his family realized he wasn't nearby, panic set in immediately. They searched every corner of the property, calling his name, retracing steps, checking sheds, creeks, and nearby tracks. But Gus didn't answer. By nightfall, the outback turned cold, too cold for a 4-year-old to survive alone. And when the first search teams arrived, the hope was simple, that Gus had just wandered off, maybe found shelter nearby. But as the hours passed, that hope began to fracture. The terrain was vast, open, yet somehow it had swallowed a child whole. And that's where this story takes its chilling turn. It all began on a quiet Friday afternoon, deep in the heart of Wooltana Station. The sun was high, the air dry, the kind of day when heat shimmers over the earth, and even the wind seems too tired to move. At some point between late morning and early afternoon, Gus Lamont was last seen near the property's homestead area. He was close enough for adults to assume he was safe, close enough that no one imagined danger could be waiting just beyond sight. Then, suddenly, he was gone. The first few minutes were brushed off as what every parent knows, a brief moment of panic when a child wanders just out of view. But when minutes turned into an hour, and there was still no sign of Gus, reality hit. Something was terribly wrong. Family and workers began searching immediately. They called his name, fanned out in every direction, and checked water holes, sheds, and fences. Still nothing. By evening, the police were called, and a full-scale search began. The South Australia Police, SES volunteers, and local station workers joined forces. Drones scanned from above, thermal imaging cameras swept the ground, and trackers studied the sand for footprints. The first night passed with no discoveries. No clothing, no tracks, no sounds. By the next day, the search intensified. Helicopters hovered overhead. Volunteers from nearby towns drove in to help, and authorities mapped out grid patterns across kilometers of open land. But as the search expanded, one eerie truth emerged. There wasn't a single trace of where Gus had gone. The land was soft enough to hold tracks, yet no footprints were ever confirmed. No signs of struggle, no items left behind. It was as if the Outback itself had erased him. By day 3, police began describing the conditions as harsh and dangerous, warning that survival would be unlikely without shelter or water. The search area stretched to over 100 square kilometers, and still, nothing. And while the public watched with growing dread, those on the ground faced an unspoken fear, the possibility that this was no longer just a missing child case. Because even in the vast emptiness of the Outback, a disappearance without a single clue doesn't happen by chance. In the days following Gus Lamont's disappearance, the search transformed into one of the largest coordinated efforts the South Australian Outback had seen in years. Dozens of police officers, state emergency service volunteers, local pastoralists, and even aircraft teams joined in. From the ground, from the air, and with every piece of modern search equipment available, they scoured Wooltana Station and its surrounding terrain. Helicopters traced wide circular routes over cliffs and gorges. Drones scanned riverbeds and sparse vegetation. On foot, train trackers walked shoulder to shoulder through red dust and scrub, calling Gus's name into the emptiness. But the Outback gave nothing back. Not a single footprint. Not a scrap of clothing, not even a piece of disturbed earth. And that's where the unease began to set in, not just among the public, but among those conducting the search themselves. Because normally, in a case like this, something turns up. Even if the outcome is tragic, there are signs, tracks, items, traces that confirm movement or struggle. But here, there was only silence. Authorities continued for days, then weeks, expanding the perimeter outward, checking water sources and mine shafts. They brought in heat-detecting technology, dogs trained for scent and rescue. Yet despite all that, no clue was ever found. According to police reports, the weather was challenging. Daytime heat climbed above 30 degrees Celsius, and at night, temperatures dropped sharply. Conditions that made the search both dangerous and unforgiving. Still, many couldn't understand how such a large-scale operation, with over 100 people involved, could yield absolutely nothing. When day 12 came, and still no trace of Gus appeared, the search was officially scaled back. Authorities stated that all reasonable areas had been covered. But for the public, and especially for Gus's family, those words cut deep. Because how could a search be considered complete when there were no answers? No closure. No sign that the boy they loved had ever left the ground beneath their feet. That decision, the call to reduce the search, sparked a quiet outrage online and within the community. People questioned whether enough had been done, or if the rough terrain was simply being used as a convenient explanation for failure. And beneath it all, one question lingered, the kind that keeps people awake at night. Was Gus ever truly lost, or was something being overlooked? As the official search faded, and the weeks turned into silence, theories began to take root, each one reflecting not just speculation, but desperation for an explanation that made sense. The first and most widely accepted theory came from authorities that Gus had simply wandered off into the rugged outback and succumbed to the elements. A heartbreaking possibility, and one that many initially believed. But even that theory began to fracture under scrutiny. Because Wooltana Station isn't just endless desert, it's a place with rough tracks, soft dirt, and visible terrain. A 4-year-old's tiny footprints should have left a trail. Search dogs should have caught a scent, but neither did. If he truly wandered away, why was there not a single sign? Not one trace in the earth, not one item dropped, not even a clue of direction. The second theory came from within parts of the public and online communities, that the search itself was flawed. That in the critical early hours, confusion and coordination issues may have caused key areas to be overlooked. Some pointed out that Wultana Station is a massive property, with natural hazards, caves, wells, sinkholes, that can easily conceal evidence. Others wondered if the timeline of the initial report was precise. How long was Gus truly missing before the alarm was raised? And could those missing hours have shaped everything that followed? Then came the most unsettling theory, the one whispered more than spoken. That perhaps Gus didn't simply vanish, but was taken. to even suggest that invites scrutiny and anger, and yet it's a question people can't ignore. Because when every natural explanation fails, the human one begins to emerge. Could someone nearby have known more than they shared? Could an accident have occurred, and panic led to a decision that buried the truth, instead of revealing it? It's here that the case begins to divide people. Between those who believe the Outback claimed an innocent child, and those who sense that something about this story doesn't add up. And in the heart of that divide lies the one truth everyone agrees on, that a 4-year-old boy does not simply vanish without the land or the people, leaving a single trace behind. When you look closely at the case of Gus Lamont, it's hard not to feel that uneasy mix of disbelief and frustration, the kind that creeps in when something doesn't fit. The official narrative feels neat, too neat for a story built on so many unanswered questions. A small child wanders off. No tracks. No trace. The land swallows him whole. Case quiets down. But reality doesn't behave that cleanly, does it? This is where the system starts to show its cracks. In rural cases, especially in remote Australia, searches often rely on small local stations, limited personnel, and terrain that overwhelms even the best trained teams. When the first hours are lost, the chances of recovery plummet. And in Gus's case, those first hours may have been everything. But what's even harder to accept is how quickly the conversation around his disappearance faded. When the search was scaled back, there was a sense of closure offered to the public, a quiet, polite suggestion to move on. But the Lamont family didn't move on, and neither did many Australians who felt that something about this didn't sit right. Because when a child vanishes, there are no reasonable limits. There's no such thing as a finished search. There's only the need for truth, wherever it leads. Some locals spoke about the land as if it were cursed, how people underestimate its danger, its scale, its ability to conceal. But even that doesn't erase the fact that every trace of human evidence vanished too. It's not just improbable, it's almost impossible. And this brings us to a deeper issue: how we as a society handle tragedy that has no resolution. We crave answers so badly that we accept the first story that seems plausible, because uncertainty is unbearable. But in doing so, we sometimes bury the truth, right alongside the mystery. The disappearance of Gus Lamont isn't just a story about a missing boy. It's about the limitations of our systems, the fragility of hope, and the quiet failure that happens when urgency fades. Because in the end, no official statement, no search statistic, no comforting theory can fill the silence that follows a child's last known moment. And maybe that's why people are still talking, still searching, even when authorities stopped. Because deep down, everyone feels it. This story isn't over. So here we are, weeks after the search was called off, and the desert still holds its silence. But silence doesn't mean peace. Because the questions surrounding this case only seem to grow louder. How does a 4-year-old vanish in daylight, on familiar ground, without leaving a single trace? Where are the footprints, the dropped toy, the scrap of clothing that nature couldn't hide? And why did it take so long? Days before the public even saw a photo of Gus. Then there's that abandoned blue Hyundai, belonging to a man named only as Benjamin. A separate missing person case, unfolding just kilometers away, discovered by the same search team looking for Gus. Coincidence or connection? And if it's a coincidence, how many coincidences does it take before you start asking harder questions? And what about the father, who reportedly wasn't told his son was missing until hours later, by police, not family? For many, that single detail felt like a red flag waving in the wind. These are the gaps that keep people awake at night. Because when a child disappears, every unanswered question feels like a wound that never closes. Something happened out there in the Outback, something no one can quite explain. And until we understand what, there's no real closure, just an open stretch of land, an open case, and 1,000 theories circling in the dust. At the heart of this story, beneath the speculation and the theories, is something far simpler and far more painful. A child who never came home. A family left with questions instead of answers. And a community that still drives those same dirt roads, hoping one day they'll see something, anything, that everyone else missed. It's easy from a distance to turn a case like this into just another mystery. But this isn't fiction. This is a real 4-year-old boy, one who laughed, played, and trusted the world around him. And somewhere in that vast silent land, the truth of what happened to him still waits. Whether it's hidden under dust, buried in silence, or buried in someone's memory, it deserves to be found. Because Gus Lamont wasn't just another name in a headline. He was somebody's son, somebody's light. And maybe that's the hardest part, knowing that even when the cameras leave and the search teams pack up, grief doesn't stop. It lingers like the outback wind, invisible, but always there. So what do you think really happened to Gus Lamont? Was this a tragic accident in one of the harshest places on Earth, or something darker that no one's been willing to say out loud? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the search ended too soon? And if you're watching this, wherever you are, remember, stories like this only stay alive when we keep asking questions. If this case moved you, take a second right now to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more than you think. Your support keeps these stories in the light, where they belong. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, don't do crime, or you'll end up on this channel.